Hello, I'm Holly Kirkpatrick, host of our podcast series Extra by No Boundaries. I'm outside the Broadway Auditorium to talk to you about a Buffalo sports story that began 100 years ago, just a few blocks from here in the First Ward, when a young, scrawny Irishman named Jimmy Slattery took an interest in boxing. Now used to house road salt, the Broadway Auditorium once rivaled venues in New York City and San Francisco for boxing's premier bouts. And it's right here that Slattery's path to the World Light Heavyweight Championship began. Slattery was raised in the St. Stephen's district of the First Ward. The son of a Buffalo fireman, the neighbourhood would often gather in the family's backyard to watch Jimmy and his father spar. The years of relentless bouts between the two on an uneven dirt surface would pay dividends for Slattery's career. We spoke with Thomas Carr, nephew of Slattery's manager, Red Carr, to hear about how the two were paired.
My father and Uncle Red both came over from Italy in 1907 when my father was 10 and Red was 13. In the early days, they had a newsstand, and later on, after World War I, which Red and my father were both in, Red opened up a gym, and Slattery come in there one day wanting to be a fighter. And Red took one look at him and says he was too skinny of a kid, he could never be a fighter. But the kid persisted, and eventually Red was taken in by his natural talent. And that's how it started.
After a series of charity fights and sparring matches in Red's gym, Slattery, aged 16, made a name for himself locally at a tournament held at the Broadway Auditorium. According to Slattery's biography author, Rich Blake, the Broadway Aud was an immense fortress standing in the heart of Buffalo's fast-growing black community. It held a special spot in the hearts of the locals. The facade was castle-like, harkening back to its origins as an armory at the time of the Civil War. By this time, Red Carr no longer could ignore the possibility he had something special, and so he set about the task of altering the boy's lackadaisical technique. Slattery distinguished himself by fighting upright, with arms low, his head unprotected. Red taught him to strengthen his punches and ready for counterattacks. At age 16, with 100 licensed boxers in Buffalo alone, Slats had a better chance of being elected to Congress than of ever being mentioned in the same breath as world heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey.
Larger than life. Can't overestimate what a big deal Jack Dempsey was. But he had a falling out with his manager and some issues with his finances. So he stayed out of boxing for a great part of the middle part of the 20s. And what did he do? He toured with the Vaudeville Act. And one of his first stops was Shades. Well, it's actually Lowe's Theater in Buffalo, New York. And it was during his week in Buffalo he got to meet and hang around Slattery. And the two actually did become fast friends. There's a part in the book where Slattery plays a prank on Dempsey. But Dempsey would tell people, there's the kid that's going to take my title. And in fact, that quote ended up being in the newspapers around the world.
Slats started boxing at the age of 17 in 1921. He fought over 125 fights and won well over 100, close to 110. Because of his youth, he wasn't able to fight more than 6 rounds until 1925, when he was 21. Slats quickly rose to the top of the ladder in the light heavyweight division and drew national attention when he beat the acclaimed Jack Delaney in a non-title bout.
Slats was gaining steam. He had a hard punch and blazing speed. Yet his meteoric rise to prominence started to show cracks.
There was a fight staged in the July of 1925 at Abbott's Field, and the boxing fans in New York City, they didn't care who Slattery fought. They just wanted him on the card. And they threw Slattery in there against a little guy named Dave Shade. Well, that ended up being the most embarrassing defeat. Slattery on the big stage had never been knocked out, and a lot of people thought he went into the ring intoxicated. He was never able to confirm that. His manager always denied it. But this little guy, Shade, wouldn't have been given any chance against Slattery, and he knocked him out. And boy, that kind of changed the trajectory of Slats. It really did. It humbled him for a while. But he had another shot at the end of that summer at the title.
In 1927, Jimmy Slattery won the NBA, the National Boxing Association, version of the light heavyweight title when he defeated Maxie Rosenblum in Hartford, Connecticut, 1927.
The National Boxing Association rose up to challenge the legitimacy of the New York State Athletic Commission. With a newly created world light heavyweight title from the NBA sitting vacant, Slattery fought Maxie Rosenblum for it and won in 1927. However, the New York State Athletic Commission title was still the gold standard, and Slats fought Tommy Loughran for the title later that same year.
His greatest fight was a fight that he lost by a slim decision against Tommy Loughran. That was 1927. Again, had he won that fight, he would have been undisputed light heavyweight champion. Just came up a little short. It's typical Buffalo, but...
Then as Loughran outgrew the light heavyweight camp, he went into the heavyweights, causing a vacancy, and there was an elimination tournament, and it came down to two fighters, both Buffalo boys, Jimmy Slattery from the south side and Lou Scosa from the west side. Two local boys fighting for the light heavyweight title was the talk of the town.
Yes, to further emphasise Buffalo's prominence in sport at that time, in February 1930, a Buffalo Irishman and a Buffalo Italian were facing off for the World Light Heavyweight Championship.
Any version of a boxing championship was a huge deal, especially the New York State version in 1930, when he defeated another Buffalo guy, Lou Scosa, in what Buffalo fans dubbed the Battle of the Century. The Buffalo Broadway auditorium filled to the rafters, half West Side Italians, half South Buffalo Irish, just a madhouse scene. And that's probably the pinnacle of boxing in Buffalo.
It was a good fight, a close fight all the way. Slattery won a split decision, now claiming the New York State Light Heavyweight Championship of the world. Later, he lost the title to Maxie Rosenblum. Now, Slattery and Rosenblum were noted for their many fights. They fought 7 times, Slattery winning 4 of the 7. Slats won the first 3 and the 5th, and Rosenblum won the others. Now, Jimmy's demise started with having a problem with drinking, which Red Carr was well aware of and did everything he could to help prevent this by taking Slats out of town and putting him in a room and actually locking him in the room. And devious as Slats was, he'd tie the bed sheets together and get out the window and go out. Sometimes he was gone for days at a time, much to Red's frustration, because Red was so into Slats and it was so upset that all this was going on. But the drinking, I believe, was caused by his instant fame and notoriety from a kid from the First Ward was more than he could handle. He was the toast of New York City. Women were falling all over him, and he was on the top of the circuit, and it was just too much for him, and I think he just fell into this trap of excessive lifestyle, which eventually led to his downfall.
Slattery was inducted into the Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame in 1992 and the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2006. For the full story of his life inside and outside of boxing, as well as a highly descriptive account of Buffalo in the 1920s, you can purchase Rich Blake's biography online titled Slats, The Life and Legacy of Jimmy Slattery.